Hello, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Kim Circle podcast, a sanctuary of truth, transformation, and soul centered living. I am your host, Jessa Francis, trauma informed yogi, alcohol free beverage consultant, holistic shadow work coach, writer, speaker, and a guide for those ready to return to themselves. If you've been with me since season 1, thank you for staying close. If you're new here, I'm so grateful to know that you have found this space. Over the past few months, I have been deep in creation, reshaping the Kim Circle not only as a podcast, but as a living, breathing community of healing and embodiment. I've built a new framework that now holds our membership space, one that helps people move not only through their shadow work, but from awareness into embodiment and from self doubt into deep self trust. This season, we're going even deeper into the work of reclaiming your story, your energy, your truth. It's the real integration work that happens after the breakthroughs. We'll talk about shadow work, nervous system wisdom, alcohol free living, creativity as medicine, and so much more. I'll also be sharing updates on my latest offerings, including the Kim Circle membership and my one on one holistic coaching programs. Because whether you're walking through a season of grief, growth, or reinvention, you don't have to do it alone. If you're ready to go beyond just coping and finally embody the freedom, presence, and peace that has always been yours, then this season is for you. So get cozy, take a breath, come as you are. Let's drop in and rise together. Welcome to season 2 of the Kim Circle. Okay, my friends, today we are looking at failure. We're looking at failure in a different way. And as always, this is a topic that I come by with my own personal story of understanding of of failure in itself, of pushing through this work and coming out on the other side. So when I first had my son, I wanted more than anything to be the best possible mother. I had just turned 22 when I had my son, a young woman myself, still so naive to the world and still so naive to even my own self. What I hoped for more than anything was simple. And I hear this from so many others. We just want our children to be happy. I wanted a happy, well-loved, well-nourished, well-raised little boy. I thought I had so much of that worked out, and I was quickly proven very wrong. I thought that protecting and loving my son meant helping him to succeed. And I still didn't realize at that time that failure was a huge part and a very important part of that process. An important part of the success in itself that I was seeking for him and myself. I was swallowed whole by my failures, and it took an incredibly long time, or so it felt, to understand that failure is a beautiful sign of expansion, growth, and devotion. But beyond the misunderstanding of what it meant to actually help my son and eventually my girls, I had to learn to accept and even embrace failure. And there was this deeper misunderstanding of myself, how to retain myself, my sense of self within motherhood. And it has been that journey that has brought me forward into the deeper understanding of how to be a good parent to my children by embracing my own authenticity, who I am, as a human that is constantly learning, growing, and changing. And failure is a massive part of this process. I can still sit here and think that I failed as a young mother, but I can also look at all the things I did right and how I am still growing, learning, and evolving. and that failure is such a beautiful part of this process. Today, I want to share with you what I have learned about failure from the psychological behind, from the psychology behind why we fear it so deeply, to those more practical tools that have helped me transform my relationship with it. Most importantly, I want to talk about how our own relationship with failure shapes the relationships our children will have with it for themselves and the rest of their lives. So let's look at the psychology of failure. Why we fear failure so deeply. So let me start with something that will probably resonate. That voice in your head that screams at you when you mess up. The one that says you're not enough, that you should have known better, that everyone else has it figured out and you're the only one struggling. And here's what I've learned. That voice is lying to you. Always. But why do we have it in the first place? Okay, so our brains are wired for survival, not growth. When our ancestors lived on the savannah, making a mistake could literally mean death. Being rejected from the tribe meant you probably wouldn't survive. So our nervous systems developed this incredible sensitivity to failure. It triggers that same alarm system as physical danger. And when we fail, our amygdala, which is that fear center of the brain, lights up. We get flooded with stress hormones. Our bodies literally experience failure as a threat to our survival. No wonder it feels terrible. But here's where it gets really beautiful. Failure is actually, take a deep breath, the gateway to change in our brains. Let me say that again. Failure is actually the gateway to change in our brains. Okay, so there's something called neuroplasticity. And that is the brain's ability to reorganize and form new neural connections throughout our lives. And here's the critical part. This only happens when we make mistakes. Okay, we have to mess up. Neuroscientists have found that when we get something right, there's very little brain activity. But when we fail, our neurons fire like crazy. The brain is literally lighting up, creating new pathways and reorganizing itself to adapt. So one of my favorite podcasters, Andrew Huberman, who is a neuroscience professor at Stanford, he puts it very simply. And apologies for me clearing my throat. Errors are the gateway of plasticity. Okay? Without mistakes, without failure, the brain doesn't change. It doesn't grow. So when we avoid failure, when we play it safe, right? When we only do things we already know how to do, we're literally preventing our own growth. So another psychologist at Stanford, Carol Dweck, who has spent decades studying how our beliefs about failure shape our entire lives, has identified two fundamental mindsets. There's the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. So the fixed mindset is the belief that our abilities are set in stone. If we fail, it means we don't have what it takes. Failure is a verdict on who we are. Okay? And then our growth mindset is the opposite, right? The belief that our abilities can be developed through practice, through effort, and that failure is feedback. It's information, and it's how we learn. And here's what's fascinating. Brain scans show that people with these different mindsets, right, have completely different neural responses to failure. And that makes sense, right? When someone with a fixed mindset makes a mistake, their brain basically shuts down. It goes into threat mode, which is flight, fight, freeze, fawn, right? But when someone with a growth mindset makes a mistake, their brain increases attention to the error. They're literally more capable of learning from it. They lean in rather than shut down. And the research shows that people with a growth mindset are less prone to anxiety and depression. They bounce back from setbacks more quickly. They're more willing to take on challenges, have better relationships. They experience more joy, more satisfaction in their lives. And the most important finding for us as parents, right? Children don't inherit their mindset about failure from their parents' beliefs about intelligence, right? They inherit it from their parents' beliefs about failure itself. Okay, so if we treat failure as shameful, as something to hide or avoid, our children learn that failure means there's something wrong with them. But if we treat failure as valuable information, as a normal and necessary part of growth, our children learn that failure is simply part of being human. Okay, so from here, we're going to look at how our children absorb our relationship with failure, because all of this really has helped me grow as a mother and as a human in general. Okay. So I want to talk about something that honestly rocked my world when I learned about it. So I learned about something called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are brain cells that fire not just when we perform an action, but when we observe someone else performing that same action. Okay? So if you see someone smile, your mirror neurons fire as if you're smiling. If you see someone in pain, your mirror neurons fire as if you're in pain. Like, think about when you see someone cringe and you cringe. This is the biological basis of empathy, right? So everybody's like, oh, I'm an empath. Yes, it's how we understand each other without words. But here's what this means for parenting. Our children's mirror neurons are firing constantly in response to us. They're not just hearing what we say, they are absorbing how we feel, how we react, and how we move through the world, right? And just take a breath here and think about that for yourself, right? It's not just your kids, it's you. You were watching your parents. You were absorbing from your parents. And this isn't a place where we point finger and blame. We are not pointing our fingers at ourselves. We're not pointing our finger at our parents, right? We're just learning this with compassion, with curiosity. So when I look back on my raising, I can see that both of my parents had very normal ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving, right? And of course, based on the science of mirror neurons, I mimicked those people around me, right? My caregivers, the people I was around. My nervous system felt safe in those emotions. Those were the acceptable emotions, and I kept that as my baseline. Right? So think about that for a moment. Think about how you have been mimicking, not, and this obviously goes much deeper than failure, but you have been mimicking the emotions that were modeled to you as acceptable. So then we take that and we go forward. Your child's brain is literally mapping itself based on what it observes in you. So when you feel stress, their stress response activates, even if they're sleeping in another room. And when you're calm, they're learning what calm feels like in their own bodies. So this isn't about becoming perfect. Let's just lay that out. Obviously, right? This is not about becoming perfect. It's about understanding that our children are learning how to be human by watching us be a human. And the more we learn to accept our failures and move through emotions in a healthy way, the more they will. So, what happens when your child watches you fail, right? If they see you collapse into self criticism, if they hear you call yourself stupid or worthless, if they watch you give up, their mirror neurons are absorbing all of that. They're learning this is what you do when you fail. But if they see you acknowledge the failure, feel the disappointment, and then get curious about what you can learn, if they hear you say, well, that didn't work, let me try something different. If they watch you persist with kindness towards yourself, they're learning something entirely different. They're learning that failure is survivable, that it doesn't mean something is fundamentally wrong with you, that it's just information. The research is so clear. Our emotional state as parents is one of the most powerful teaching tools that we have. Not what we say about our emotions, right? Not the lessons we try to preach and teach, but how we actually move through our own emotional experiences. So let's talk a little bit more about that baseline that we inherit, okay? I get into these funks. And I know I'm not alone. Where I know that I'm the only one that can pull me out of them. I know that it is my responsibility to shift my focus, to bring myself back to gratitude, to elevate my own frequency, right? But I get into these funks where I'm just like, oh, I'm just in this funk, and I just like I come back to the old baseline, right? But to better understand the funk in general, I have needed to really get to know myself, right? And this all comes around to shadow work. I've needed to get to know not just myself, but what my regular patterns and behaviors are when it comes to specifically to the way I feel. Okay, and here's what I've kind of discovered is that my nervous system has established a baseline, right? And that baseline was set by the emotional patterns that I absorbed growing up. And those emotions felt safe because they were familiar, even if they weren't pleasant, right? And the only way I've been able to shift it is to force it lovingly by doing some of the things that I have found jolt me. So here's some of the things that I do to jolt me, to force myself out of my funk. right? Because I'm noticing, okay, I'm going back into this baseline of these regular emotions because this has become my normal pattern of feeling. And when I want to feel better, I need to do something to make myself bring enjoyment in, right? So even when I don't feel like it, I go take a walk. I practice my gradual gratitude. I put blaring happy music on and I force myself to wiggle shake. Sometimes it ends up me doing a little bit of rage dancing, a little bit of crying dancing, and then shifting, right? I will go and I'll look at myself in the mirror where I can do that same thing. Maybe I need to just get out some rage. Maybe I need to get out those fears. Let myself cry, and then I shift into laughter, right? And one of the biggest things is putting my phone down and doing something creative without technology. And that's one that's really hard, but so important, right? It feels uncomfortable at first taking these actions because what I'm doing is I'm literally changing my nervous system's baseline because I don't want that fixed mindset. I want the growth mindset. And I am capable of shifting that. But, this is the work. It is my life. And I have to do the things that are going to adjust my baseline lovingly. I have to celebrate my small wins constantly and bring myself back to the understanding of failure as growth, right? And when my children see me doing this work, they see me catching myself in my negative patterns. They see me choosing differently. They see me being gentle with myself, showing up for myself when I mess up, when I make mistakes. I'm not afraid to say, dang it, I made a mistake, but it's okay. It's okay, and I'm going to try again, and I'm going to figure this out, right? They're learning that they can do that too. So I want to share with you some teachings also that have another thing that has kind of profoundly shifted how I work with failure. And they come from Joe Hudson and his work with the art of accomplishment. Joe works with some very, like top executives and founders and people who are supposedly, right, successful. And what he has found is that even at the highest levels, people are still at war with themselves. They're still trying to avoid certain feelings, still believing that if they could just get rid of their failures, their fears, their uncomfortable emotions, then they'll be happy. But what he teaches has really helped me. Whatever emotion you're trying to avoid, you are inviting into your life in exactly the way that you're trying to avoid it. Let me say that again. Whatever emotion you're trying to avoid, you are inviting into your life in exactly the way you're trying to avoid it. Okay, think about that. If you're trying to avoid feeling out of control, you'll create situations where you lose control. If you're trying to avoid feeling rejected, you'll create distance in your relationships that leads to rejection. So the way out isn't through avoidance. It's through that emotional completion, being with failure, not fixing it. Okay, so most of us, when we fail, we immediately jump to one of two places, right? We go to problem solving mode where we're trying to fix it, or one of the most popular is the avoidance of the feelings, right? Numbing out, bypassing, distraction. But neither of those are going to allow us to complete the emotional experience of failure. Emotional completion means fully experiencing the emotion without trying to change it. It means being with the disappointment, the shame, the fear, the frustration, and allowing it to move through you. Like I had said, like I get to a point where I know I need to get out of my funk. So what do? I let myself rage. I let myself cry, and then I pull myself out, right? I let it move through me. So emotions are like weather systems. They come, they peak, and if we let them, they pass, right? But when we resist them or try to push them away, we trap them into our system, right? So here is kind of how we can practice really being with emotion, right? It's like, and let's look at failure. So we're going to notice the failure, right? Obviously, we notice, okay, I messed up here. And we don't immediately jump to fixing or explaining. We just notice it. And then we welcome the emotion that is attached to that, right? I know it sounds crazy. But you actively invite in that feeling of failure. All right? Feel it. Feel it in your body. Where does that fear live? Where does that disappointment live? Where does that shame live in the body? Right? And then you stay with it with love, with compassionate curiosity. What is this emotion trying to tell you, right? And something will arise from that. And then you let it move through you. Emotions that are felt fully will naturally just complete, right? And the one of the biggest problems with all the, that's why we teach somatic work, and I do somatic work within my coaching, is because a lot of our issues are unexpressed, unmoved through uncompleted emotions from the past that are trapped in the body. But if we do it in real time, right? If in the real moment, we just let ourselves feel the feelings, it doesn't get trapped in that first place. So this is not about wallowing, right? And like, oh, woe is me. It's about processing. And it typically takes just a few minutes, right, for an emotion to complete if we don't resist it. It's not like it takes a long time if you actually let yourself feel it rather than avoid it, right? So one of the most powerful shifts is it happens when you notice the difference between these two statements, right? I am failure, and that didn't work, right? I am failure, like you identify with the failure, and that didn't work is like, this is just information. That didn't work, right? So when we can separate our identity from our actions, failure becomes radically less threatening, right? We're teaching our nervous systems that failure is okay. And this is very different from what when we were first talking about ourselves on the savannah, like in tribe times, like we are not in that space and time anymore, right? So failure becomes objective rather than personal. So this is where our growth mindset and that emotional completion come together really beautifully. We feel the disappointment fully, that emotional completion, and then we see it as information rather than something to identify with. That's the growth mindset. So accepting that you failed doesn't mean you're giving up, right? Or that you're okay with failure, right? It means you're acknowledging reality as it is so you can work with it rather than against it. right? When we resist what is, we spend our energy arguing with reality, right? Wishing it were different, believing it shouldn't have happened. We get angry at God, right? We create suffering on top of the pain. Pain is inevitable. Suffering, however, is optional. The suffering comes from our resistance to the pain, not from the pain itself. Okay, so we're going to talk now a little bit about Phil Stutz tools. So I came across the psychiatrist Phil Stutz, who has worked just like Joe with some of the top performers out there in the world. And he has developed what he calls in his book, it's called the tools. And they are simple techniques that create immediate shifts in how we relate to our problems. So, traditional therapy often focuses on understanding why we have like a problem, right? Diving deep into the past, analyzing our childhood, excavating the roots of our issues. Sounds a lot like shadow work. It is, right? But what Stutz' approach is a little different. He says understanding is not enough, right? And that's why I talk about like moving from shadow work to shadow work integration, right? We need tools to help us act in the present moment, to go from that aha moment and that awareness out of that awareness loop into being able to move forward with practical tools. So his philosophy is that our problems aren't handicaps. They're opportunities to access deeper resources within ourselves. But we need specific techniques to make that shift happen, right? So one of them is called the reversal of desire. And this is one of Stutz' most powerful tools for working with failure specifically. So his concept is this: we spend enormous amounts of energy trying to avoid pain, right? And we want to move away from discomfort. But this avoidance actually keeps us stuck, right? Same thing as Joe Hudson. And the reversal of desire means moving toward what you're afraid of rather than away from it. So when you fail and you feel that wash of shame or disappointment, instead of trying to push it away, you actually move toward it. You say, come, right? I want to feel this. Bring it on. And why does this work? Because the moment you stop running from the feeling, it loses its power over you. You're no longer controlled by that avoidance. So here is kind of how to practice that. Think of something you're avoiding, right? It could be a task, a conversation, it could just be a feeling, right? And then you visualize the discomfort as a cloud you're moving toward. Okay, it's there in front of you. It's this thing, this avoiding that you are avoiding. And then you just say, I can do this, or bring it on, or whatever it is. Like, I want this, right? And you move through it. You actually say, like, I want this. And you move through it, and you imagine coming out on the other side into a state of freedom and power. Right? And so that right there is just understanding that every painful part of life leads to beautiful growth. Right? If you're a mother, you went through incredible pain to birth your children. Right? And every beautiful thing that is birthed into this world, whether it's a tree cracking open from an acorn, the butterfly bursting from the chrysalis, the child breaking free of the womb, right? So that's the concept, is understanding that pain when you go through it, is going to result in something beautiful. And when we think about it this way, it literally rewires your relationship with discomfort. So instead of seeing failure as something to avoid, you start seeing it as something you can and actually want to move through. Okay, so another practice that Stutz has is he teaches something called active love. So one of our biggest obstacles, right, is self-judgment. When we fail, we attack ourselves. We believe that harsh criticism will motivate us to do better, right? We get really hard on ourselves. But it doesn't. It just creates more resistance, more shame, and more stuck energy. And what he teaches with active love is about sending love, actual love, toward our failures and our imperfections. So bear with me. I know that this sounds maybe a little woo-woo, but it's actually deeply practical. So when you send love towards something, you soften, you open, you become able to work with it rather than fighting against it. So think about something about yourself you judge harshly. Okay. And then visualize it as separate from you. Maybe as like as a different person or a different object, something that you don't like about yourself, and you separate it from you. And then you see that separateness and you intentionally send love toward it. You just imagine filling it with your love, the love that you would give to your child. Now feel what shifts in your body when you do this. When you send love toward that part of you that fails, toward the mistakes you've made, toward the ways you have fallen short, you create space for change. You're no longer frozen in self-attack. You're free to learn, to grow, to try again. And then the grateful flow. So, one of the most powerful antidotes to negative thinking is gratitude. I've talked about this over and over. But it's not just thinking grateful thoughts, right? So, the grateful flow goes this way. When you catch yourself in negative thinking, right, especially after failure, you stop and silently list specific things you're grateful for, right? You go slowly and you really feel the gratitude for each one. This is my gradual gratitude practice. You walk and you just let that feeling of gratitude build and build and build. You stretch for new things. You don't just repeat the same things, right? And you keep going until you start to actually feel that shift. Right? So you're walking or maybe you're driving. I'm so grateful for stop signs. I'm so grateful for these lines on the road. I'm so grateful for the steering wheel. And it's like everything in your environment where you just start noticing all of these random things that you're grateful for. And you just are like, wow, I really am grateful for this because, what would our world be without, civic engineers and, these vehicles and the ability to move and go from space to space, and my ability to get to my brother's house or to my mother, and then it just builds and builds and builds. So negative thoughts are more powerful than positive ones, right? And it feels that, and I think you can resonate. Negative thoughts can be really powerful, and it feels, right, that they are even more powerful than those positive ones, and they're literally kind of sticking to our brain. So, and that's why we need a very disciplined practice to shift out of them. So right now in November, the Kim Circle is practicing its gratitude month. Every single day, we are shouting our gratitude to the rooftops, right? And this isn't about toxic positivity. It's not about pretending that everything is fine. It is about training our minds to see the full picture, right? The failures and the blessings, the struggles and the gifts. So the real work is living it daily, right? And let me be really clear, I'm not perfect at this. I still have days where I collapse into my own self-criticism. There's days where I avoid hard things. There's days where I feel like I'm failing at everything. But what's different now is that I have awareness and I have these tools and I have self-compassion. I know that when I'm in a funk, I'm the only one who can pull me out of it. Not because there's something wrong with me for being in the funk, but because it's my nervous system, my patterns, my responsibility to work with my nervous system, to break free of those patterns, to break out of that funk. And that's actually really empowering, right? Because it means I'm not helpless. I'm just human, right? And that brings me right back around to why it's okay to fail and why everyone here on this planet, all of us, all of us, all of us, we're humans failing, right? And learning. So when I'm I'm noticing I'm in a negative pattern, I pause, I name it. Usually it comes up in my journaling, right? I'm in a funk. I write out. And then I ask myself, what am I avoiding? What do I not want to feel? Right? And I give myself permission to do that emotional completion, to feel that emotion, right? And then I use one of my tools, right? I do my gradual gratitude. I practice that active love or the reversal of desire. I do something physical to shift my energy, right? I go to the mirror, I'll cry, I'll rage, I'll dance, I'll go for my walk, right? And when I fail at something, I know I need to practice that emotional completion first, right? I need to be able to feel the disappointment fully. And this is hard because it's not my baseline, right? It's not the normal thing to do. The normal thing for me to do is to avoid, right? So I have to, okay, I failed. I know I failed and I have to do this work. I separate my identity, who I am, from the failure, right? That didn't work, right? That didn't work. Okay, what could I do next time? It's not I'm not a failure, right? It's I made a mistake. But it's not who I am. I'm not the mistake, right? I ask, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? And I celebrate, and this is kind of hard, but I celebrate that I tried, right? The attempt itself is a win. And this one is big. That's a big thing right there. You celebrate that you tried. And then, I model this process out loud if my kids are watching. I want them to see. I want them to know. I want them to have this now. When I feel stuck, I get creative. Like I said, I look at the mirror. I practice that active love. I let myself rage or cry. I celebrate these wins. I do this stuff because, once again, it is my responsibility. So, this is the part that matters most. My children don't need to see a perfect mother. I wanted to be a perfect mom, right? What they needed more than anything, and what they need, and I know this now, they need me, the real me, the authentic me. They just need that, they need me, right? And when they see me fail and then they watch how I work with it, they're learning that failure is normal, that emotions are okay to feel, that you can be kind to yourself even when you mess up, that growth requires discomfort. And here's a big one: you are not your mistakes. They're learning that being human means constantly learning, growing, and yes, failing. And they're learning that failure isn't the end, it's the beginning. So, I want to help you change your relationship with failure. I want to give you some concrete practices that you can start using for yourself today. Okay? So I'm going to put these in the show notes, but I want you to do I want you to do a kind of a failure reframe journaling, right? So each week you can write down one thing that didn't go as planned, right? What emotion arose? Be specific. What you learned or could be learning from it. And then one thing you appreciate about yourself for trying. Okay, so that's one. And then there is the mirror practice, right? I want you to stand in front of a mirror and say, this can be awkward at first, but trust me, mirror work works. You look at yourself and you say, you will cry probably. I do. I see you trying. I love you even when you fail. You're learning, and that's enough. Thank you for not giving up. Do this especially after failure. And like I said, it's weird at first, but do it anyway, okay? And so there's a few others, and I will definitely, like I said, I'm going to put these in the show notes, and we're going to dive in even deeper into the Kim circle, where we're going to be looking at all kinds of other practices, and you're going to be able to find some of these may work for you and some of them may not, but we're going to find the thing that works for you. So beyond that, I'm also going to be sharing, some extra things that can help you if you're a parent, about how to talk to your children about failure and how to actually create more of a failure friendly home, right? The goal isn't to celebrate failure for failure's sake. It's to create an environment where failure is seen as normal, as informative. It's not shameful, and an opportunity for growth, right? And that can look like sharing your failures openly. That can look like not hiding your mistakes, not making excuses, and actually demonstrating self compassion in front of them, right? Apologizing when you mess up and letting them see you do the emotional completion. So when I look at myself, look back on myself as that 22-year-old young mother holding my newborn son, I wanted so much to be this perfect mom. And I had so much love. I have so much love for that young woman. She was doing the absolute best that she could with what she knew. But I also wish I could tell her, you don't have to have it right. In fact, your imperfection is going to be one of your greatest gifts to your children, right? Like your willingness to be seen in your struggles, your courage to keep trying even when you fail, your capacity to be gentle with yourself, your authenticity and the messiness of being human, that's what they need to see. Because that's what will give them permission to be fully human too. I've spent years now learning to work with failure instead of against it, learning to complete emotions instead of avoiding them, learning to love myself in my imperfection, learning to adjust my baseline lovingly. And you know what? I am still failing all the time. I still get it wrong. I still have days where I feel like I'm back at square one. But now I know that those days are not setbacks. They're just more opportunities for growth. Failure isn't the opposite of success, it's the pathway to it. And the greatest gift we can give our children or just the world, right? And our friends and the people that we care about, and our employees and all of those things. It's showing up and saying, we're it's not about protecting them from failure, right? It's the tools, it's giving them the tools to work with it, the resilience to move through it, the wisdom to see it as a teacher. So here's my invitation to you. What failure have you been avoiding? What emotion have you been running from? What part of yourself have you been judging too harshly? Can you bring love to it? Can you move toward it instead of away from it? Can you see it as information instead of identity? And can you let your coworkers, your employees, your children, right, depending who and where you're at, your friends, your parents, can you let them see that you're doing this work? Because that is the deepest teaching we can offer. Not perfection, not having it all figured out, but the willingness to show up just like I am right now. I'm trying. And I'm failing some days. And I'm letting myself feel it. And I'm letting myself keep growing. And that's how we break the cycle. That's how we raise resilient humans. That's how we finally give ourselves, our children, permission to be beautifully and perfectly courageous and human. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for being willing to fail, because it means you're willing to grow. Thank you for joining me in this sacred space of storytelling and witness me and my growth and the witnessing of yourself and your growth. I'm so grateful to have you here. But before we close, I want to offer you something right here, wherever you are. I want you to take a deep breath in. Take in everything and just let it settle. Breathe out, exhale. Release anything that didn't serve you. But hold on to whatever wisdom that has stirred in you today. Take a few more full breaths. You matter. Your story matters. The world needs you, the realest, most authentic, and most brilliant version of you. The path that you've walked, the lessons that you've learned, the person you're becoming, all of it matters. And whether you share it through writing, conversation, or simply by living more authentically, The world needs your particular way of seeing and being. I hope to see you in an event or inside the membership, the Kim Circle membership. Find me at Jessa Francis on Instagram or Facebook or untoxicated.world. You can learn more about me on my website, thekimcircle.com. That's THECAIMCIRCLE.com. See you next week.